Welcome back. All right, so due to the fact that we're about halfway through the season, and it's hard to measure halfway through the season now with some teams playing 35 games and some playing 45, or at least roundabouts. So I figured today's a good day to do this, right? The Friday before we get into a busy weekend of games, and we're almost up to the All-Star break, so sure. Now, when I graded teams after the quarter, I used letter grades, which seemingly threw the whole thing into a complete shambles. So instead at the half, I'm going to measure it differently. Teams that have exceeded, and by how much. The further above the line a team is, the more they've exceeded expectations. Met expectations would be here. Failed to reach expectations is all the way down to the shocked Creed or Dean Evison face. And so the degree to which a team is below the line is how far I think they've fallen short. And you guys can let me know what you think in the comment section, of course, regarding this. It is similar and it's set up to a panic index, but it's different in that a team that's at the bottom, not necessarily panic there. A team that's at the top, not necessarily jubilant at this point, but they should be, I guess. So let's go ahead and jump into this. I'll start off with Ottawa. So I've got three piles here that I'm going to go with. I'll start with Ottawa. Ottawa, for me, has failed to meet expectations. Now, if you go by the expectations of the team, I think you end up right down about here. If you go by expectations of most in media and just prognostications, they're not meeting the expectation, but they're not as far off. So I have them in between met and failed, but definitely below the met line, because can't argue that they've met expectations. Philadelphia, well, they're right down here. Philadelphia has absolutely failed, and this is despite a lot of people thinking they weren't going to be a playoff team this year anyways, but they were not expected to be at the bottom. They weren't expected to be fighting it out potentially for a number one draft choice in 2022. Now, if they win the draft lottery and they get Shane Wright, in the end, the pain may all be worth it. Years down the road, we may look back and say, you know what, that was a rough year for Philly, but boy, did this ever work out well. But we have to go through months of games before we get to that point, and then months after those games are done while everybody else is playing in the playoffs. And so it's been a rough half year for Philadelphia. Next up, Anaheim. Anaheim, I'm going to put right in between. Now, first quarter, I would have had them up here because they'd exceeded expectations by a lot. Now, in recent weeks, it's started to kind of turn on them. Now, they're still in a playoff spot. By my standards, they've still exceeded, just not by as much as they had after that first quarter. Plenty of season left in the Pacific. They can absolutely still end up being second. They're going to have to keep exceeding expectations. Dallas. Dallas is tough. Their points percentage isn't bad. I'm going to go ahead and just put them right on the line. Say they've met expectations. They're right around where I think they were expected to be. I did see the odd prediction that they might end up in the top three in the division, but in general, I think they're right around where was expected of them after last season. I think the expectations got dialed back. So yeah, I'd say Dallas is right around where they would have been expected to be. And that's better than where they would have been a couple weeks ago. That 4-game road trip where they won every game on the road, that helps a lot and gets them, I think, to Met. Now, if they can keep winning like that, then we end up in exceeded territory after that. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about Arizona. Now, early on, Arizona was awful, but I kind of feel like at this point we're looking at a team that might win 20 games. I'm going to put them a little bit above the line. I'm going to put them a little bit above the line, even though they have 10 wins in their first half of the season, because that's more than we expected, especially with the first month this team had. This team was so miserably bad. There were legit questions of whether or not Washington's futility record of 8 wins in a season might be in jeopardy. And I didn't know if they'd get there. I really didn't. I didn't enjoy watching their games. I was not feeling it. It just felt like there wasn't much point in watching their games. Obviously, they were going to lose. The games weren't exciting. All of a sudden, they're playing exciting hockey. They're winning their share here and there. Yes, they also lose a lot, but they're very entertaining games, and I think they've been a little bit higher than expected this year. Detroit. Detroit's a tough one. I'm going to say at this point, I mean, they're below the playoff line. They're 1 game below 500. They're more competitive. I'll put them on the line saying that they've met expectation. I think that's right about where we had expected them to be. probably better than Ottawa, Buffalo, right? Montreal's a surprise that they're ahead of Montreal. We'll get to Montreal. But for Detroit, yeah, I think they're about where we expected, record-wise and how they're doing. And this is, Yzerman's doing this long-term build. Detroit could very well be a playoff team next season. So keep an eye on them next year. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has absolutely exceeded expectations, and I'm going to put them right up there because even though they lose last night against Seattle in extra time, Pittsburgh has been pretty fantastic, and a lot of the fantastic was without Malkin, and some of the fantastic was without Malkin and Crosby. And they had games without Malkin, Crosby, and Carter, I believe, was out at the same time for a while. So it's been remarkable to see their record, despite there being some holes in the lineup people can spot, but they're still playing really, really well. And so Pittsburgh, I think, has exceeded expectations. A year where a lot of people figured they might fall back. They absolutely have not. Boston. Boston's a wild card team currently. Yeah, I'll put them on the line saying that they've met the expectations this year. I don't think they've exceeded them. I think they've been good. I think that it's going to be tough for them in the playoffs unless that depth scoring works. Like if Pastrnak stays on that second line, and if the chemistry as with Hall and Haula ends up translating throughout the regular season and then into a postseason, maybe they're dangerous. But for me right now, Boston, I have them as having met expectations. I don't see them right now as, a team that holds up the Stanley Cup in June. But I'd like to be wrong on that one. I wouldn't mind. Some people say, you're going to be wrong. That's one of those times I'd like to be wrong. San Jose. San Jose is, I would say, mildly above expectation at this point. Again, the Pacific Division being pretty wide open. I think for San Jose, I have them a little bit less surprising than Anaheim. Anaheim was expected to be at the bottom. San Jose was expected to be the best of the three California teams, depending on what happened with the young kids in LA, right? So to me, San Jose, I'll put them a little bit above having met expectations and say that they've exceeded them a bit. So they're not quite in that top tier. Buffalo. Buffalo it's kind of the same as Arizona. We saw them get off to a good start though, and it's kind of fallen off. But before the season started, we looked and saw Anderson and Dell as their goaltending tandem and said, "Boy, that could mean a lot of long nights." Begrudgingly, I'll put them on the same spot as Arizona, only because, like I said, they had a good start. And since that good start, it's been pretty mediocre. But I'll say they're still a little bit above expectation because Arizona and Buffalo were both seen as teams that completely tore everything down. And yet Buffalo may not finish last in their division. Buffalo may end up being higher than Ottawa at the end of the year. So that is unusual, and not like from a perspective of Ottawa being bad, being unusual. But Ottawa was supposed to be getting better. They were supposed to be taking that next step. Buffalo was supposed to be horrible on purpose to try to get a top pick. And Buffalo may very well not get that top pick. The good news, the 2022 draft is supposed to be stacked. Calgary. For Calgary, I mean, I had them in a playoff spot. I know there were others that had them in a playoff spot that saw them bouncing back. I'll put them a little bit above the line. I'll say they've exceeded expectation, but not by a lot. Now, if this was being done early in the season after the first 10 games, they might be up around here. But yeah, for Calgary, I'll say they exceed expectation, and it's not by a lot because they have had some definite setbacks since that hot start. But yeah, they're still a little bit ahead. If you look at points percentage, I think of where people might have expected them to be. A 600 points percentage, not many people had them being anywhere near that before the season started. Edmonton. Edmonton has definitely not lived up to expectations. So today they signed Evander Kane, and this is part of why. Now, I don't have them in the completely failed category because they had that hot start, right? That 16-5 start is still keeping their playoff hopes alive from here going forward. And bringing in Kane has meant to turn things around. Now, they've won their last two games. Overtime win over Vancouver, shootout win over the Nashville Predators. but their wins, their points they get under their belt. And so Edmonton already looks like maybe they're ready to start turning things around. Adding Kane may very well help. But to this point, they're still below the expectation line, because Edmonton was supposed to be the team that might be able to threaten Vegas for first place in the division. And there's a real chance right now that they don't make the playoffs. Carolina. Has Carolina exceeded expectation? I think they have, even though they were seen as like one of the better teams. But I'm going to put them here, and I'll explain why. Before the season started, they had changed their goaltending. They had changed parts of their defense as well. They'd let go of Dougie Hamilton. There were a lot of changes. And when teams make a lot of changes like that, it is common. It is common for those teams then to have some struggles out of the gate as guys get that chemistry with one another. There has not been that problem in Carolina. You look at Slavin and D'Angelo, that's one of the better tandems in the NHL. They make each other better, I think. And really, Carolina, it's been seamless. Their goaltending, they changed it. They're good. Their goaltending's fine. Is it great? Anderson had a really good start. I still think he's a very good goaltender. But the way Carolina plays, it doesn't matter if he's great, because they're able to score 4, 5, 6 goals, sometimes seemingly at will. So for Carolina, I think it's been remarkable how few speed bumps there have been along the way. The expectation that there might be a little bit of a struggle here and there, I really think that's something that we didn't see. Chicago has not met expectations. Before the season started, they were supposed to be at least in the running for a playoff spot. I'm going to put them at the same level as Ottawa and Edmonton. Now, before they fired the coach, Jeremy Colleton, I would have had him down here and failed with Philadelphia. It's been better under Derek King. They're still not a playoff team, but it's been better. So for Chicago, they're still not meeting expectations when we look at where they are at the half, but I think it's better than it was after the first quarter. So there's that. Seattle. Seattle has not met expectations. What's weird with Seattle is, if they were added to the Metro division, let's just say that the division was 7 teams and it was the Metro, and you put Seattle in there, the expectation would have been they're going to be 8th in the division. Because they went into the Pacific, the perception that that's the easier division, there were a lot of people who had them 4th in the division, and arguments about whether or not they could end up top 3. It has not worked for Seattle to this point. They can still, be 500 the rest of the way and salvage the season on some level. But I don't think any of us envisioned Seattle having this many struggles. And so far, I don't think they've lived up to the expectation. We can call that the Vegas effect. I think that's accurate. But yeah, so Seattle below the line, not failed, but yeah, this has been a rough go. Florida, honestly, I'm going to put them right up here at the top. And I say this even though I felt they would probably be first in that division. But wow, it has been a remarkable run. Now, of course, the road record thing too. But man, at home they're 22-3. This is an absolutely phenomenal home team, and the scoring at will is something to behold. You could just see that switch turn on during their games, and teams can't defend it. Teams just, they can't defend against whatever Florida's doing. And I do think it exceeds expectations. There were some comments I remember seeing after last season about how Florida, it's a fluke, it's a one-year thing. They're not going to be able to do it again. We're going back to the normal divisions. Florida's not that good. It's going to all go back to the way it should be. And I never really felt that way with them. But again, I understood why. Because last year, we didn't have to watch any teams outside our own division. You could just watch your own division. So you could look at another division and say, well, that team's doing really well, say Florida, and say, yeah, it doesn't matter. Next year, back in normal divisions, it won't happen. It's happening. St. Louis. St. Louis has definitely, I think, exceeded expectations. I don't know that it's by a ton, so I'm going to put them in the same category as Anaheim and Carolina, but they have been fantastic in a year where, again, because the Central is so fluid and it's so hard to pick out which one's going to be the best, you might pick St. Louis as the best before the season started. You might have them ranked as low as 5th before the season starts, and you could make an argument before the season started for that. Now you could not argue them 5th. You couldn't do it. The surprise, too, has been Ville Husso. So while people are complaining about Binnington, and the advanced numbers would tell you Binnington's actually had a good season, just Husso's had the better year. It's been nothing short of remarkable seeing Husso basically having a Binnington from 2019 type run so far this year. It's been fantastic. We'll see how far that can go. Colorado, Stanley Cup expectations, but 17 wins in a row at home. They're threatening a record. The record's 23. I don't think any of us expected that, but we did kind of expect, and they were the number one team in the NHL last year. I'll say, put them in the same category here. So I'll put them in that same category at this point. So again, if anybody thinks Colorado should be higher, go ahead. Just take like a permanent marker and just go ahead on your phone. Don't do it. The LA Kings. I really think they've exceeded expectations. So is it more or less than Anaheim? And this is where it's interesting on the board. So based on projections before the season started, Anaheim was projected as last. Most, if not everybody, myself included, last. They're going to be last in the Pacific. It hasn't happened. The Kings perceived as maybe being that team in California that could take that jump up. So to me, the Kings, their rise is definitely above that line. But should it be at the same level as Anaheim? I'm going to put them here. I'm going to put them as they've been better than I think we might have expected. But I do think the degree of surprise is a little bit less than Anaheim. I do. I feel that way. The LA Kings may very well end up in the playoffs. They would be tough to beat in the playoffs. I don't think they'd be an easy opponent at all. But so for the Kings, I'll put them there. And so we'll see how the second half of the season treats them. But so far, they look like they could be a playoff team, which is not something that very many of us expected. Tampa, honestly, I'm going to put them here because I expect an excellent record from Tampa. I expect them to be competitive every night. They've won back-to-back Stanley Cups. I think they've met that expectation. And, I mean, winning 3 in a row is really, really difficult. Are they going to be able to do that? But right now they look pretty darn good, and I don't think there's a team in the East that would say, in the first round we'd really like to play Tampa. Maybe Toronto. Maybe Toronto would say we'd really like to play Tampa in the first round. Maybe Toronto would accept that and say, the ultimate way to defeat this idea that we can't get out of the first round would be to defeat the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions. So maybe Toronto. Would that be an honest statement? Maybe. Sure. Why not? Minnesota. I think Minnesota's been better than expected. I do. I mean, and I'm saying this even though Minnesota took steps last year. I'll put them in the same level as like LA, Calgary, Buffalo, San Jose, Arizona. And that's where this gets interesting too, is that some of the teams that exceed expectations are not necessarily good teams with good records. Just they're not as bad as expected. In Minnesota's case, they were expected to be pretty good, probably top 4 or top 5, and they've been very good. They're still 4th in the division, but it's percentage points away, and I think the fight for the top spot in the Central is, unless Colorado just runs away with it, but the fight for 2nd through 4th could be fantastic in the second half of the season. So I think Minnesota's done a pretty good job so far. Montreal. Oh, it is hard not to put Montreal into the failed category. And I know people are going to bring up injuries. People are going to bring up injuries for Montreal or for Philadelphia too. And it's a similar path these teams have forged, where they both started off slow. In Montreal's case, they started off just awful, and it hasn't got much better. Philadelphia's case, they started off with a tough schedule, and then they just fell right off a cliff. Both of them are expected to have better second halves than the first half because, A, the pressure's off. I think that helps. But B, it really can't get much worse. So for me, Montreal, just based on the results, I think it's a fail. I think based on how they brought in Dvorak in the offseason, they brought in Savard, they did their best to make up for the losses that they were going through with Price, with Weber, with losing Danault. And I think that for Montreal, I think this is failed. Because if they were like, okay, well, we're in a rebuild now, or we're going to retool, Bergevin doesn't go out and get Dvorak. He would have just taken those picks from Carolina and said thanks, and said we have an extra pick now in next year's draft. Montreal didn't do that. So at this point, it's failed. I know that the game plan's changed, but that's where I'd put them. Toronto. For Toronto, man, that's a tough call, honestly. Have they met expectations? On some level, yes, but I will say I'm going to put them as having exceeded by a bit, because there were some who thought that they'd struggle this year. Well, yes, they're the best team in the North, but the North Division sucks, so when you get back into regular divisions, they won't be very good. And the reality is they've still been very good. Matthews is still one of the best goal scorers in the league. And so I really thought that while there was valid criticism of the North Division's strength last year, I did think it got overblown as the season went along. And again, it's that I don't have to watch another division because I can just watch my teams in my division. And I think there was some of that was going on there. There were some very good games in the North. And, Toronto was the best team in the North during the regular season. Things changed during the postseason, obviously. But Toronto to this stage, I think, has been maybe a little better than might have been expected. They're still in the hunt for first place. And, that could mean first place overall. Again, Colorado may decide they just want it for themselves. Nashville. I can't put Nashville anywhere other than the top of the board. That's why I'm wearing Nashville gear. They have absolutely blown expectations out of the water. Duchesne, 21 goals. He's going to get 40 goals this year at this pace, and he is full value for it. You can't just say, well, it's a career year, and, well, he's not playing that well, but you can't make those arguments. Saros has been absolutely fantastic in the year after Pekka Rinne retires. Johansson's had a nice bounce-back year. The blue line's been really solid. Yossi, again, looks like he wants to win himself the Norris Trophy. And, yeah, everything for Nashville right now looks pretty darn solid. And even the way that they went through the expansion draft looks brilliant now, because Alexander Carrier looks very good. Jeannot could very well be a under-the-radar pick for the Calder, and he could win it. I really think that as more and more teams see Tanner Jeannot, he is impressing more and more in the press and opponents, and I think that he is building up quite the rep, and Jeannot could end up being the Rookie of the Year. New Jersey. It's a tough call for me with New Jersey. I kind of want to put them on the Met line, but I'm going to put them a little bit below it. I think that they've failed to meet expectations by a small margin. They're not really in the playoff hunt right now, and I think they had hoped to be playing games that meant something at this point in the year, at least meant something more than what they do. So for New Jersey, I don't think they've quite met that expectation, and the record before Hamilton's injury wasn't great either, and I think the expectation with bringing in Dougie Hamilton was that things would get better, and they really didn't for New Jersey. So for me, I'm going to put them there, just a little bit below the Met line, not like failed and just all of that, but yeah, I have them just a little bit below the line. Islanders. It's been a rough go for the Islanders. Absolutely a rough go for the Islanders. They can't get above 500 now, but they've had a good run the last month or so. So I'll put them down with Seattle. Because, again, the expectation being they would be a playoff team after back-to-back Final Four finishes, and it just hasn't been there. So for the Islanders, I'll say yes, they've missed out on what was expected of them. And yes, there was the 13-game road trip to start the season. Then they were one of the first teams hit with a massive COVID shutdown. And it was awful, and it really put them behind the eight ball. But again, in putting this video together, it's just, did they meet or not meet expectations? It's not as much a why didn't they meet expectations as just they didn't. So in the Islanders' case, a team that I thought might win the division, that's not going to happen. But, hey, that's just how that works. So yeah, the Islanders, do I think they could bounce back next year? Absolutely. I don't have a lot of hope for them this year for the playoffs, but maybe, right? Maybe just maybe. Columbus early in the year was exceeding, right? Now they're a little bit below 500, and I'm going to say that they've now met expectation. Where they are right now is where was predicted. It's not necessarily pretty how they get here. There's a lot of games where they get blown out kind of thing going on recently. But for Columbus, I think they're pretty much where it was expected. It is more painful when you get there after what's a pretty encouraging start, and then it just kind of falls off. So for Columbus, they're right about where was expected, and I would think that they're selling off players pretty quickly here. We will probably see a pretty active trade deadline once they start making actual moves, which I don't know if that's going to happen this year. I'm starting to have my doubts. Vancouver. So for Vancouver, I just got these today, and of course I had to magnet these up. I have 4 of them, so there's 3 more in the stack here. But it's the Lunar New Year Vancouver magnet that I do intend on using because it's the year of the tiger on the Lunar New Year. So these are decals that are available through the Canucks team store, and I got myself a keychain as well with that on it because I think it looks fantastic. But on to Vancouver season. I only have to say that because it's the first time I've used it, and there may be people saying, what is with that logo? Vancouver has not met expectations this year. But what was the expectation? And I think it depends on which Canuck fans you ask. Now, I'm not going to have them in failed. Before the firing of Benning, they absolutely are under failed. I'm going to put them in the same row as Chicago, the Oilers, and the Senators. I think for Vancouver, it has been tough. I think Bruce Boudreau comes in, and it's this really great winning streak, undefeated in regulation. Then you have the road trip that kind of takes the air out of the balloon there. And overall, right now, they don't look like they're going to be a playoff team. New management talking about who they might sell and what they're looking to do with the team. It's pretty obvious the Canucks are going into a retool. And it's probably overdue. Probably at least 6 years overdue. But what do you do? The Canucks still, I don't think they've met expectations for this season. 1 game below NHL 500 at this point, just not where fans, or I think most of the media had hoped they'd be. Vegas. Well, it's funny. Vegas has gone through all of their injuries, but they're first in the division. They're first in the division, and for that reason, I'll say they've met expectations. Is the record as fantastic as they might have hoped? No. But I do think Vegas has met expectations. I don't see any reason to have them above necessarily. I don't see any reason to have them below. When a team's first in the division, how far below can you? I mean, they're number 1 seed then going into the playoffs. If the playoffs started today, number 1 seed in their division, they get the number 2 wild card, and so for me, they get the number 1 wild card because Colorado get the number 2 wild card. That gets into the whole wild card discussion. Don't need to get into that here. But for Vegas, I think they've met expectations. I do. New York Rangers. Rangers have exceeded them. And I'm going to put the Rangers up here with Pittsburgh. And it's been remarkable because, it's just Shesterkin's been lights out. He is likely the favorite to win the Vezina. I would say, if I had to handicap it right now, I would say it'd be between, him, Saros, and Nashville. Jari's right there. Bobrovsky may end up being there too. Yeah, and then if Husso plays enough games, maybe he gets some votes too, right? It should be interesting, but I think Shesterkin's got the inside track. It doesn't hurt him either that Georgiev over his last few starts has really submarined his save percentage and goals against average. So with that difference between the starter and the backup, I think that gets more attention too. So the Rangers have exceeded expectations. It is interesting to me because there are certain teams where when I'm writing out the scoring in games, it seems very repetitive to me. The Rangers, it does. Florida, it absolutely does as well. Where it's like, okay, so it's Zibanejad from Panarin and Fox. The next goal was Panarin from Zibanejad and Fox. This one's Fox from Panarin and Strome. And it just feels like it's the same few guys you're going through all the time. And it's not an insult to their depth. The depth's there. It's just their top scorers are that consistent and dangerous that you look at that scoring that you're putting up there and go, yeah, that's the same combination they always have. Which means the opponents know it's coming and they still can't stop it. Washington's tough too. I'm going to be tough on Washington to put them a little bit below. Because of all the overtime and shootout losses they have, which are 9 of them, they're in a top 8 spot. They're very highly likely to make the playoffs. I don't see them ending up dropping out of the playoffs. but I don't think they're playing particularly well either. And so while Ovechkin's been fantastic and he's one of the top scorers in the league, it feels like that's kind of slowing down too. And so this is where that magical, we just don't know what's going to happen part comes in. Backstrom comes back and you expect everything to probably get better for Washington. It hasn't yet. It still could, but it hasn't yet. And so for me, Washington is just a little bit below that line. I don't think they've performed up to expectations. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that have below expectations. Well, we might as well make it 10. Winnipeg. Of course I round out with Winnipeg, right? I think Winnipeg, I think it's a bigger disappointment. I'm going to put them down next to Vancouver, the team that beat them last night. Winnipeg really should be better than this. You look at that roster. That roster is really good. And I'm not sure how they continue to just play the mediocre hockey. I know that Paul Maurice stepped aside and he may have been seen as part of the problem. But it feels like for Winnipeg, they just can't get out of this funk. And it's not a good funk. Like, there's good funk. This isn't a good funk. This is you know, there's like Terry Funk is good funk, and then there's Flash Funk, which was nothing against Too Cold Scorpio, but come on. So, yeah, the Flash Funk name was terrible. But yeah, so the Jets right now, it's been something. And they should be a team that right now is looking at a playoff spot in the West, because you don't need to have a fantastic record to be a wild card team in the West. But for the Jets, they haven't been able to win consistently enough. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.